And we are live. I see the numbers going up. So, and exactly as we go live, the drill upstairs starts drilling. Perfect. Welcome everybody. Feel free to say hi in the chat. Tell us where you're joining from. We'll wait a couple of minutes for everybody to roll in. I am joining from actually Rennes, which is in France. Yeah, we'll take a couple of minutes. Hey Anders from Sweden. Yeah, so Anders, you sent a message to hosts and panelists. In general, everyone just try to send to everyone so that everyone can see. So yeah, we'll take one extra second. We're also live on the YouTube, so that's good. Usual housekeeping rules. The session is recorded, so Shauli will do about a 30 minutes presentation, and then we'll open it up to Q&A at the end. We'll send over the recordings tomorrow, so don't worry about taking too many notes. And also Shauli was kind enough to include a bunch of useful links and resources in the follow-up email, so you'll get all of that. Yeah, and I think with that, the numbers are really great. I think there's a lot of people joining. I think we can get started. Shauli, today's topic, super interesting title. So I'm really keen to dive into it and see what it's all about. But yeah, I think with that, the stage is yours, and take it away.
Cool. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone who joined. It's really a pleasure to be here. When we launched Kubescape about almost a year ago, with the idea of trying to help users understand better what's going on in terms of security in the Kubernetes clusters. We had a mission to create this kind of like open source that will bring on that promise, and it's great to see that we have so many data by now that we can share. And of course, if you want to learn more about what we've shared here, or if you want more information, always feel free to reach out to me. So with that in mind, I'm just going to share my presentation. I hope everybody can see my screen.
Yep.
And the topic is, as we said, what we have learned from scanning over 10,000 Kubernetes clusters. Before I go into it, just a little bit about myself. I'm Shauli. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Armo. I'm a software developer that turned into entrepreneur, during the years. And I'm a very big fan of surfing. And I try to keep a cadence of waking up, going very, very early, go surfing, and then, spend my day building Kubernetes security products for developers, and go home to put my 3 kids to sleep, which is usually a tougher assignment than most of my day. So this is basically my life. This is me. I'm available on Twitter. I'm available in LinkedIn, of course. I will share with you my email and everything, and it would be great to keep touch. And if you need anything, happy to start a conversation. Just a little bit of background before we go into it. I know the crowd here is a very technical crowd, so most of you are probably already familiar with this, but Kubernetes is basically the new cloud-native operating system. The annual survey from the CNCF showed 96% of organizations are either using or evaluating Kubernetes, 5.6 million developers using it worldwide. And it is increasingly becoming, more and more popular and being used in production. I think 2021, in my mind, from what I've seen with our customers and with our users and in our discussions, 2021, the big thing in 2021, in my mind, wasn't the number of users who are using Kubernetes, but the transition of Kubernetes from being, putting it into development or the testing area into actually moving workloads in Kubernetes to production environments. And that is also why Kubernetes becomes more and more, goes out of the radar. It's no longer under the radar for attackers and for researchers. And 2021 has been also a year where they have found so many different vulnerabilities and attack vectors on Kubernetes. Now, I believe that in order to solve those problems, what I see is that developers, and more specifically DevOps, are the people who end up needing to actually resolve all of those issues. And that's why we believe that we need to build tools for developers and not for CISOs in this landscape in order to find and solve security issues. I see security, if you're a DevOps engineer, I don't know if you like it or not, but I see security responsibility coming your way. I actually think most of the developers and DevOps people I speak with are very much well versed in what's going on in security. They know security very well. And actually, I think it's one of the biggest misconceptions that developers don't care about security. I see the exact opposite in the developers and the DevOps people that I speak with. Just a little bit about who and how people are using Kubernetes, why using Kubernetes, improved scalability and shortened deployment time are one of the biggest drivers to Kubernetes usage. I see more and more lately people discussing how complex Kubernetes is, and I agree that Kubernetes is actually not for everyone. You need to have a certain environment and a certain architecture in order for it to make sense, and we can talk more about it. We see that the release cycles in Kubernetes are mostly weekly. We see monthly, we see multiple times a day. And the most interesting thing for me is what role in your organization is in charge of Kubernetes security. We see that 27% say it's the DevOps, 21% the Ops, which is architecture platform, then DevSecOps, and then security. That's what I was saying before. Security is going and becoming more and more an integral part of the engineering team. The thing that people are most concerned about when we think about Kubernetes are misconfigurations and vulnerabilities. And detecting misconfigurations is the top thing that happened in the last 12 months as a security incident when you ask organizations. And 99% of cloud breaches will have a root cause of misconfiguration. That's according to Gartner by 2025. And I think when you think about the complexity and the fact that we are all human beings, and the fact that automation is putting so many things under the radar, I think it's not far-fetched to say that misconfigurations in these complex environments are one of the biggest things to solve, and that's why in Kubescape that's where we started. And we're going to talk a lot today about what type of misconfigurations we see most in the clusters that we have scanned. I will go very, very quickly about this. This is just a general notion. If you think about Kubernetes security, you should have two main things in your mind as you think about it. The first one is shrinking your attack surface, finding misconfiguration, resolving them as quick as possible, not allowing drift in your environment. But then eventually you also need to get to runtime security, and you need to be focused on actually ensuring that whatever holes in your system that you still have, because you never solve all of the issues, you are still protected for something that comes up in runtime while you're while you're in production, and for that you have many different security tools as well. We believe that we need to bring all of those together. Kubescape is currently focused on the left side on posture management, but we have a lot coming out in terms of runtime security in the next 6 to 12 months. So what did we do? We used Kubescape. Kubescape is a very simple tool that you can start using. Once you start using it, you can then expand and use the entire Kubescape platform. I will show you how to do it today very, very quickly. But this is the data that I'm going to share with you today is data that we've collected through this tool, and with users who've used this tool in order to scan their clusters for misconfigurations. You can go to a GitHub page. It's just almost like stage GitHub, Kubescape, and you have all of the instructions on how to get started. I'm going to show you today how quickly it is to get started. And what you will get once you go into the system and you can sign up for free for the platform, you will not only get risk and compliance, but also role-based access control, visualization, and image scanning. And we are always trying to bring all of those things together because we think posture is a bigger thing than just one of those three. We are building I'm going to go through that. So research result. I just want to skip to get to the gist of things, and let's share with you what we've seen when we analyzed the results of 10,000 clusters that have been scanned. So in terms of the regions of the data set, this is the data set overview. 48% of the users and the clusters that we've scanned were in North America, 33% were in Europe, and the rest were in APAC and EMEA. And in terms of the user title, when someone signs up to Kubescape, they can provide their title, and 57% of the users are DevOps, 5% are DevSecOps. I think this is mostly due to the fact that this is a title, it's a relatively new title, and I think it's going to grow. And then security engineering architects are the other 25%. Pretty much what I was expecting when we started to look at the data set. Okay, so there is a very big trade-off between number of clusters and cluster size. This is something that many users and many people that I speak with have concerns about, and they ask, how should I do it? Should I have like many small clusters or one big cluster, and how should I work? The trade-off is pretty clear, I think, in my mind. If you have a very big cluster, the control plane that you're using, you don't need to have multiple control planes, and you have one Kubernetes control plane installed, but then you need to manage different namespaces and networking. And if you want to do security, you might want to do some micro-segmentation, and there are many things you need to take care of because Kubernetes as itself is very flat. If you don't take care of all of the networking, and everybody will be able to communicate with everybody, and the bigger the cluster, the harder it is to manage it, and definitely to manage security. On the other side, when you have small clusters, you can say that the control plane may have too much of an overhead to utilize it. You don't have visibility across all clusters, so all of your tools of the environment, you need to create multi-cluster tools that will collect the data from all the clusters. So this is the trade-off. But if you think about what we see in the data, most of our users had up to 4 clusters. 42% of our users had 1 cluster signed up to the system, and 2 to 4 clusters were about third, and then 3% had more than 25 clusters. And again, this is for me an anomaly. If you have more than 25 clusters, you're either a huge organization or something, you're not doing something in an optimized way. In terms of the number of nodes, we see that many of the nodes had many of the clusters had less than 5 nodes. I believe that these are mostly test clusters. When we speak with users, we see that these are usually test clusters that they're doing. The most prevalent thing and the most logical thing that we've seen is cluster sizes of 3 to 10. And then we have about another 30% that had up to 50 nodes. And then 6%, which are large organizations that have more than 50 nodes. And the thing here is that we see more and more larger cluster going into the system. I think it's also a little bit part of the usage, and people who come to use the systems, they get more comfortable with it, so they put more clusters and bigger clusters onto it, and bigger organizations are signing into the platform. But in general, we do see more and more large clusters provisioned into the system. I see like there is like chat for QA. Let's see if okay.
Yeah, so there's a question by Ravi. I can just quickly read it out. So was this scan done on dual stack IP-enabled Kubernetes stack? And you can already answer it.
Well, it depends. So, this has been done on a 10,000 cluster. So each one has different configuration, and not all of them had the same configuration. And I don't know which one had which configuration. I hope that answers the question.
I think so. You can keep going, and Ravi, if you have a follow-up, just drop in the chat. Yeah, that's cool. And anyone, like, if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. The way we got to the results, the users did it, of course, but this is how you get started with Kubescape. It takes literally 3 minutes to get your first scan going. All you need to go to GitHub. You run the scan, and you get this a very quick result in your environment. I'm just going to show you quickly how it's done, so you believe me that it is really 3 minutes. But I need to
I need to share my entire screen for that. Okay, let me know that you see my screen. So you see the GitHub page? Yeah, so if you see the GitHub page, you have here down below on very quick the instructions, and you have this installation that you use. It's all open source, so you can see what is in this install sh. You don't need to worry about piping it to the bash, because you can just look at it and see that it just downloads and installs Kubescape. And then I have here, I use GCP, and I think I'm going to need to connect again. No, I'm already connected, so I'm just pasting and installing a Kubescape here on my shell. It's the shell that Google gives me, and this is already connected to a cluster. So if I do kubectl, let's say get pods, I have like the guest book application installed here, a very simple application, like it's the minimal demo application of Kubernetes. I can scan it. So I can take this kubescan submit command line, and I'm going to run. And it's going to take like, I don't know, maybe like 30 seconds, maybe a little bit longer. Give me some time to drink. Okay. It is scanning the cluster right now. And I get all of the results. I did it in verbose mode, so you can see exactly all the results that you're getting. But at the end, you basically get all of the different controls that have been tested against the cluster, which one is critical, high, and medium severity. And you can see how many resources failed each one of the tests. And if you go up, you can see the actual resources that failed each one of the tests in a very detailed manner. You can also log in at the end. We have like this link to our SaaS version. Of course, we will not upload it without your permission. If you come to our SaaS version, we will give you an ID that you can use in order to associate your results with your account. I will show you it in a minute, but this is basically it. And what we're going to do today is we basically take more than 10,000 of these type of results and share with you what we've seen. So going back to our presentation. What happens here? My computer is stuck. Just 1 minute. I'm gonna. Okay, I know why it is. Here we go. Okay, so we go back here. And now let's talk about what we've seen. So when you scan, we give you a result of like a risk score. The higher the score, the higher the risk. 100 is a very, very bad score to have. And we scan your cluster, and we scan each of the clusters against different frameworks, different compliance frameworks. The most popular one that I'm very fond of is the NSA guidance for Kubernetes security and Kubernetes hardening. We basically check. We took the document and we created a framework of checks against this framework, and we show you how you stand against that framework. We also do the Mitre attack, and we have our own ARMO best practices, which is basically a lot of practices that we took from both Mitre and NSA, and added some of our own that we think are needed in order to be secure in your cluster. And we are now adding CIS, and you can expect that to be coming out very, very soon. For the benchmark, after scanning 10,000 clusters, what we can say is that the best practice is to keep your score below 30. Okay, and if you keep your score below 30, you are generally speaking in a good position if we compare it to other clusters in the market. If you have a risk score of above 60, it puts you in the top 5% of worst clusters in terms of misconfigurations that we found. And if you get a risk score below 10, it puts you in the best 10%. So this is kind of like a benchmark for you if you test your cluster that you can check against and see how good or bad you are. In terms of what are the top 5 security misconfigurations that we found, we can see that running as a privileged container happened in 50% of all clusters scanned, which is mind-blowing, right? The fact that you run privileged containers, like you say, by now everybody should know not to run privileged containers, but we see it happening quite a bit. Now I have to say 50% is all of the clusters that had privileged containers running in them. I imagine that some of them needed to have those privileged containers. You can mark an exception, but I don't know if all of our users did that. So this is the raw data. Using cluster admin binding is a very concerning one. Missing resources policies, some people will say it's not a big one, but it's a very, very common one. Not using immutable container file systems, and not blocking ingress and egress to workloads that shouldn't be open outside and shouldn't be communicating. So those are the top misconfigurations that we found. And one of the biggest things that I'm kind of like shouting out to everyone here is stop running privileged containers. There's just mostly no reason to, unless you're running something which is part of the control plane. But also, when you think about running privileged containers, there are actually 2 things to keep in mind. One of them is, what in the security context, whether you enable privilege is true or not. And the second one is, again, in the security context, in which user are you running? Are you running as a user which is more than 1,000, basically, and non-root users? And those 2 are very different, right? If you use privilege true, you basically kind of like cancel the entire container isolation concept. You basically put a container that can do anything they want, as long as they have the privileges, on the host which is running on. This is, in my mind, one of the worst things that you can do in your container. If you run as a user, as a root user, sometimes there is a very good reason to run as root within the container, and that's completely okay. But also, if you do that, basically you leave yourself more exposed to kernel vulnerabilities. And many of the attacks that happen in Kubernetes, they basically enable you to kind of like escalate the privileges and get into a root user and then go out of the container. So that's why both of these are super important, and you should use both of them. Now, a pop quiz, which you can maybe, some of you can put the answers in the Q&A, or you can send it to me afterwards. Very happy to get your thoughts. But if we all know that if you run as a user 0, a root user, and the privilege is false, the result that we get is a root process within the container, but it doesn't have capabilities on the host. This is basically the ideal situation. We also know what happens in the other different situations, but what happens if you have a non-root user, a regular user, let's say with ID 1000, but you leave privileged as true. So you have this kind of like process which the container itself has access to the host, but the process within the container is not running as root. There is a question of what happens in that situation. And I'm not going to answer it. If someone is going to answer in the Q&A, that'd be great, and I'd be happy to read it out to you guys. But I can send you also the answer afterwards, because I do want to keep some tension going. So that it makes sense. I'm going to continue with the presentation. This is just an example of running privileged containers. And one of the biggest CVEs, I would say the one that made a lot of noise and a lot of news in the past year has been CVE 2022-0492, which was a privilege escalation and container escape that could be done in Kubernetes. And if you just had that control off, you would not be vulnerable to this pretty serious and critical vulnerability. So that's why, you know, those type of things are interesting. What else did we learn? 63% of all clusters had workloads that were exposed outside of the cluster. So basically, no network policies and being able to actually connect to them with any place. And the way to solve it is with using this ingress capability. In order, this is of course, ingress is part of Kubernetes, and basically being able to control who is actually accessing your cluster. I see I have a Q&A. Let's see. Okay, Igor, I saw your question. I saw your response. I'm gonna share it with everybody else. You're right, by the way. I'll share it in the end. 63% of clusters, as I said, we don't have neither memory request or memory limits or CPU limits and limits on resources. This is something which is, you know, some will say it's not a security issue, but it is also a security issue. And in any case, it's a best practice that we highly recommend to use. And we check against, and we see that many users just don't do that. One of the most common users of our system is actually starting to use that. We enable the DevOps engineer to basically create like a GitHub action that can enforce any control. And this is one of the controls that is very popular, to put as a GitHub action in Git. And then when developers actually develop their YAMLs and they publish them to Git, they get, the action is running, and they get a reject that basically they don't have memory and CPU limits or requests. And this is something that many of the DevOps find very useful. 37% of clusters had application with credential configuration credentials in the configuration file. 37 doesn't sound like a lot, but if you think about exposed AWS access keys, Azure access keys, secrets, passwords, this is quite problematic. If you ask me, if I kind of like need to rate the severity of things, this is probably, I would say, one of the most severe problems that occur within Kubernetes and containers in general, misplaced secrets in different containers and environments. And after that, I would put the privilege that I mentioned above. So this is something that is very critical to understand. I want to show you what happens when you do that and how we show you where the secret is. So just as an example, if I go back, you know, I said you have here a link that you can log in to the system itself. I have the system already open. This is like the dashboard, but if I go to configuration scanning, I'm going to choose my cluster. And I'm going to choose the NSA. Never mind. We can use the NSA, but there are all controls here. And you can see, let's look for application. Application. Okay, where is it? Application credentials in configuration files. I can see here that there was one workload that has been identified with that misconfiguration. And if I go into it, I can see exactly which one it is. In this case, it's the active system. And I can go in and I can see exactly where that secret was. So this is kind of like where you can see that. And the idea is that you can see the YAML and understand exactly where in your YAML was the secret. I see that I have another question here. Let's just see. It's the same one. Cool. Yeah, people are liking your answer, Igor. Okay. Okay, like a sub, I would say a sub element of the privileged problem is different insecure capabilities. Containers running with insecure capabilities in the context. Of course, if you limit the capabilities and just open one or two capabilities instead of being complete privileged, that is of course better. But still, we need to think about giving things like macadmin and sysadmin, which are very, very useful to attackers. We need to think twice before we put them in our clusters. And we see that about 35%, 23% to 25% had one of those capabilities enabled for the workloads. So we talked about configuration. Let's talk about vulnerabilities, and that's going to be the last section in this presentation. We saw that 44% of the vulnerabilities that we saw were medium to low, 21% were critical, and this is based on the Mitre NVD, basically a database, and 35% were high. There were 64% of clusters had zero critical vulnerabilities, but 17% of clusters had at least one or two critical vulnerabilities running in a workload and exposing the workload. If we go a little bit deeper into that and see which are the top vulnerabilities that have been found, of course, the numbers don't help us very much, but it's not surprising to see that glibc is the one that has the most vulnerabilities. It's not that it has more vulnerabilities. It is just that glibc is so popular. It's probably in every one of your workloads. So any vulnerability there is being reported across so many workloads, and that's why I think this is why it gets to be at the top. We were surprised by this. This is a parser for Perl regular expression, but also it seems that it's there quite a bit with this vulnerability. And finally, I want to leave you with this thought, okay? Vulnerabilities are very, very problematic when they are exploited. But before you fix the vulnerability, you can actually fix a lot of things which are easier to fix other than upgrading and patching, which is around configurations around that vulnerability. So if I go back to the vulnerability that we talked about before, the 04921, if you just had just one of those configurations to prevent it, so you need to have all of those misconfigured in order for an attacker to be able to use this vulnerability. You can just remove the allow privilege escalation, you can deny run as root, or you can deny insecure capabilities cap dark override, and basically each one of those would basically prevent a user, an attacker, from exploiting that vulnerability. So the combination, and this takes me a little bit into our roadmap, next thing that we're going to do, we want to connect those misconfigurations and vulnerabilities to actually also give you priorities on the vulnerabilities based on that. So I think this is it. Yes, this is it. As I said before, I will be happy to connect. You can email me directly at shauli@armorsec.io. My LinkedIn is there, my Twitter is there. We would love for you to star us. If you go to our GitHub, please give us a star. We are very close to 6,000 stars, and it's not the most important thing, but it's always nice to get another star. So please go ahead. Our Discord is very active. If you have any question or anything that you want to say, please go ahead. Let us know. We are very responsive, and we are happy to get feedback and get requests from our users, and we promise to address any one of them. So yeah, this is basically much it. And then I will say, I don't know, I shared my screen, so maybe people already saw Igor's answer, but Igor said that such a user will be able to mount resources from the host system, and this is true. And more than that, it creates a little bit of a place where it is not completely clear what else that user might be able to do. But the most important thing is that if they get into a situation of privilege escalation, then we are very vulnerable. So yeah, I hope that made sense. I felt like I'm just kind of rushing through things, and I hope you find it useful. Happy to get questions, and again, also to engage with you afterwards, whatever you see fit.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shauli. I think this is super interesting. And then yeah, we'll include these links in the follow-up email tomorrow as well, just as a reminder. I mean, to be fair to Holger, Holger Koch also sent a message to both of us saying we'll be able to use the privilege further on. Would that also be the correct answer, or not?
Yeah, if they use the escalation, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. So we actually had two correct answers. We also had a question from David, who's asking, are there examples of these scans being part of a CI/CD pipeline? That was asked at some point. So I thought we'd bring it up.
Yes, definitely. So there are a few ways to do that. First of all, Kubescape as itself can be embedded into different CI/CD tools and CI/CD lines. You can do it on your own, but you also have documentation here. Let me show you as an example. If I go here to our settings, and you go to integrations, you can see all the different CI/CD tools that we integrate with, and Circle CI, just as an example. You get to our documentation, and there's a very cool not cool, but short and easy example of how to integrate and basically run Kubescape as part of your CI/CD. And also, let me show you something else. If I go to GitHub and I go to my account, let me see if I find it. Here we go. And I have this demo that I've done. So for that, I used this integration with GitHub. I basically copied this example here and made it a flow for GitHub Actions. So I can say I have a workflow here for GitHub Action, which is scan YAML, which is just a copy paste of what I've shown you before. And now, anytime this, this is a very, it's a very one YAML type repository, but every time a YAML is updated, you can see in the actions that it automatically runs a Kubescape, and you can actually get the results, and the developer is able to see it. In this case, I ran the NSA check, and it went okay, and they can see it in real time as they do the commit. So yeah, this is actually one of the most popular ways for people to use Kubescape. We also added, this is very new, but we also added repository scan. So if you have like a GitHub repository or any other repository that you would like, you can actually now scan the repository directly without having a cluster and without, and even if it's a YAML or a Helm one. So this is an example, and you can see all of the artifacts that were in this repository, and you get exactly the same results and how it passes different configurations. So this is another way which Kubescape is being used quite a bit in the CI/CD.
Holger had another question. So he's saying, so it's basically like SNCC, but for Kubernetes configuration. And Holger, please send to everyone so everyone can see the question.
Well, first of all, I'm flattered to be compared to SNCC. They're a very cool company. I would say we are like SNCC, but what SNCC is doing to code, we are doing to Kubernetes from configuration to runtime. And I focus today only on the configuration parts, but basically we have a developer-driven capability, which also does image scanning in your cluster. I didn't show it to you, but you can see visualization of all your role-based access control and find problem in your role in your role definitions. And we're adding more and more capabilities because our vision is basically that you will have an open source platform that you can use in your cluster, and will solve you the security problem. You don't need to stitch together too many tools, just one platform which is open source and that you can use for your own security as a developer.
Nice. So we're getting some questions in Q&A. So Pao is asking, is it possible to use the scan without sending the data to the cloud service?
Yes. If you can see here, when I did the scan command, where is it? My computer is running very slowly. Where is the? Okay, never mind. This is another command, but you can see I used the submit flag and the account ID. You have your account ID in your in the SaaS, and I can show you where it is in a minute. But if you don't want to use that, we don't force you to use, and you don't have to want the UI. You can just remove the submit flag or not use the account ID, and we will not send the data, and everything will be done locally on your machine.
Cool. We have but interesting name. Asking, are there any considerations for managed Kubernetes deployments like EKS?
Yes, all of the managed Kubernetes, like what I showed you now, by the way, it's a managed Kubernetes.gke, and it works exactly the same on EKS and AKS. We have also created specific controls that are specific for each managed Kubernetes, because some of the tests that you need to do on the different managed control planes are a little bit different.
Then our winner, Igor, is asking whether you tried to compare Kubescape against Treevi's new feature of Kubernetes security scanning.
Yes, we did. We think we are better. And we are, yeah, so, we did, and, by the way, Treevi is a great tool, nothing to say about it, but it is just currently at least more focused on container scanning, as it is, and they are doing great things on Kubernetes, but yeah.
Long story short, better.
Well, I'll tell you that. Test it and see, and just test it, because you wouldn't believe me, and you shouldn't. I'm a little bit biased, A
little bit, yeah. That's fair enough. So Marcel is asking if it's possible to create custom rules. Yes.
Let me show you how it's done. You can also do it without the UI and without the SaaS version. But what I want to show you is how you do it here in the. Well, okay, I need to understand the question better. I'll show you what you can do and what you cannot do. So what you can do, if you go to our controls, frameworks, you can create a custom framework. So you can change, you can choose specific controls that will only be tested in a specific framework, and we have some controls that are configurable. Just as an example, for example, if you want to enforce label usage for resources, you can define here which labels you want to force, and you can add and remove. Okay. Now, if you want to add a completely new control, all of our controls are built in Rego, and you can actually contribute it even to the open source and edit, and everybody will enjoy it, and we encourage you to do that. Or you can create one on your own. We do not yet have the capability to create it like with a drag and drop type capabilities, but if you write your own control, we can add it to the system.
All right. Holger is asking if you update the vulnerabilities in the test constantly, and how many people work on the project.
So we have our team is about 7 to 8 people, but we have about 40. I think it's 42 contributors to date that are working on the project. We are actually going to make the project a lot bigger. We're going to release much more of the capabilities. Even some of the things that you see here in the UI are going to be released to open source. And we encourage more people to join and build our vision of making this all available for everyone. So that's the quick answer. About 42 people are, the core is about 7 to 8 people. And then there are 42 people in general contributing to this project today. Oh, and how often do we update the vulnerability? It's a good question. We update it every time we run, basically. We have a backend that has that. We are using Anchor, it is important to say, for the vulnerability scanning, and we are not inventing anything from scratch. The idea is to give you all of the information and then monetize it and make more insights of it, because you connect it with other tests like the configuration test and the role-based access control.
And then we have one more from Arik. So in your example of credentials being detected in an application and being able to navigate to this file in the UI, can you elaborate how much of the application and data is being forwarded to the cloud and UI service?
Yes. So we have we can maybe, if you ask, I might give you a link to add to the to the follow-up email later. Sure. With the definitions of what data is taken to the cloud. But basically what we take to the cloud is a sanitized version of your configuration files. So the secrets themselves, they don't go up to our SaaS. Only what's going up to our SaaS is the fields themselves. Let me try to show you how we cleanse it. Maybe I have it in this cluster. Okay, this is just an example where we didn't exclude the queue public, okay, but just to show, this is just for an example, because this is probably the way it should be. Just to show you an example, that you see, we see that there is that the token is here and the kubeconfig data is here, but we don't take the actual data to our SaaS. We remove it and we don't take it, and that's the way we work. I hope that answers the question. Eric, let me know if not.
It does.
Cool.
Awesome. Any more questions from anybody? I know that we already ran over time, so we can wrap it up.
Well, what I can say, I have to say.
I also have a final question for you, by the way.
Okay, but if I may, before your question, I do have to say I do webinars quite a bit, not on this topic, but on different topics, and Kubescape, of course, and everything related to security. And I can just, if I needed to grade the questions, you're the best so far that I've had, like the most relevant questions. So clearly the right audience and the great audience.
Nice. Yeah, and I think everyone has enjoyed it. So you're welcome back anytime on the platform engineering.
Thank you. We'll be happy to.
For sure. My question is, where do you serve?
Where do you serve?
Where you serve.
Where do I serve? So this picture that I shared, it's one of the most exotic places to surf in the world, which is, well, I'm kidding, it's not. It's in Ashdod in Israel. And if anybody knows anything about surfing, they would laugh at me even trying to surf in Ashdod. But you need to, you need to live where you live. So we use the whatever little surf that we get here. And
that looks great to me. So
it's, to be honest, if you look at this picture, no one would believe it's in Israel. People ask me, is it in Sri Lanka? Is it in Indonesia? But this is just, how pictures are. Everybody's happy, and the waves are always good at the picture that you share, right? It's like Facebook.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not.
That's what I was wondering, because when you said it, I know that you're based out of Israel, and then I looked at this, I was like, wow, nice.
Yeah, well, I do go on a surf trip, once or twice a year, usually to Sri Lanka or Portugal, and much better than Israel, of course.
Yeah. Awesome. Yes, Audra, the recording is we'll send it over tomorrow. No more. Fantastic. Well, Shauli, thank you so much. This was great. As I said, you're welcome back anytime. Thank you,
Will do.
everybody, for sticking around with us until now. Yeah, and see you at the next one.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Luca. Great seeing you, and happy to come again.
Amazing. All right. Have a good evening or day wherever you are.